morning, AP Lit kids. It's weird not to see you guys in person, and this is the first time I'm ever doing one of these screencasts, so hopefully it's not too weird and awkward. But I just wanted to be able to talk to you guys and actually say some stuff rather than just type a bunch of stuff on Classroom. So, first and foremost, before we get started with talking about the end of Rime of the Ancient Mariner and then what you guys are going to do next, I wanted to touch base on the AP test because I'm not sure how much you guys have been looking into this stuff, which is totally fine. But I put up there last week, I put on Classroom that there were some certain decisions made, and since then things have been clarified. So essentially, what they've decided is that this year there's no face-to-face exam, meaning that if you all choose to still take the AP test, which Dr. Fink already said you don't have to if you wanted to seek a refund, it's usually not something that they allow because it's in the handbook that when you take the class, it's expected you take the test. But because of the circumstances this year, if you guys do feel like you want to, you'd rather not take it, you're free to do so. And you can kind of email me on the side if that's something you want to do. But in my own opinion, I feel like that this is going to be a year where most of the scores on this test are going to be skewed favorably because of the fact the way that they're going to do the test this year is they're going to be in an at-home basis. So you will type your responses, and rather than a multiple choice section with 3 essays that you have to create, you guys are only going to be writing 1 essay. Under a 45-minute time period. So the whole factor of having the mental endurance to be able to do a test like the AP test or, like the SAT is going to be taken off of you, and you're going to have the expectation of basically doing a timed write, which is what we've been practicing, all year, if not just especially this semester. So we still don't know what that one essay will look like, whether it's going to be, here's a poem, you have to write about the poem, or here's a section of a short story, write about it, or if it's going to be like the ones we've been working on more recently, which is, here's a prompt, now think of a book that you can think of that will go along with this prompt. So the more that I find out, the more I'll update you. But the other important thing for you guys to consider is the fact that there are going to be 2 days now available. So if you feel like right now, playing with my little marker tool, you are going to be able to get yourself back in that school frame of mind before summer hits and, graduation and all that stuff. You can stick with the first date that they offered, which is our May date that we were going with. However, if you feel like because school has at this point been kind of paused and we're switching over to the e-learning, you are free to take the same test later on in the summer. So there's still a lot of stuff that they're trying to scramble and put together at the AP, at the College Board. So that's all to come, but that's kind of as much as we know so far. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you is there are a bunch of updates, and if you log into your College Board account, I'm sure you can find some of these things. And I don't know why, but the College Board website is absolutely awful and it's really hard to navigate. But if you log in, usually at the top of the page, there's a little banner that says, like, see what we're doing right now to support our schools that have had to temporarily close. And you'll see one of these things. And if you click on the free remote learning resources, basically they've scrambled to try and get teachers across the country to do like a quick review of a lot of the skills that the AP classes are supposed to cover during the year. And so there's a YouTube channel where they have some of these videos. They're really rough. So imagine like if someone made me do one of these all of a sudden. So don't judge. But you can see on the screen here that they go through, they're on the longer side, but most of us right now have nothing but time on our hands. So if you choose to look at the AP literature review, they review poetry, they review longer fiction and drama. And so these are just some things that you can go through. And you can see I started the poetry one, and there's 2 teachers that like kind of simultaneously do it and they talk about it. So that's that. As kind of a last word on this before we kind of go forward with the other things I want to talk to you about, I will say, for those of you kind of wondering, like, what the heck, this whole testing thing, as far as what we've been preparing for, what does this mean? Well, a lot of the vocab that we've done up to this point, not our weekly vocab, but the huge list, the A through L and M through Z or whatever. A lot of that kind of responsibility has been lifted from you because the multiple choice section is gone. Writing here becomes the most important thing. So on that note, I still have 2 essays of yours. I have your timed right for Julius Caesar, and I have your timed right, or not your timed right, I have your independent novel that you wrote your papers about. So in trying to figure out the best way, since those are graded, to get the feedback to you, I figure that the best thing I can do is take a picture of your rubric for you and kind of give you the feedback of this is what you scored. And then if you have follow-up questions like I'd really like to see the other pages, could you take pictures of your other comments so that I could look at those? I'd be happy to do that. And further, if you want anything else, you can email me, or I'm still trying to work out all this Zoom and Google Meeting stuff, but I'd be happy to actually go through and talk to you about your papers if you want that. So look for that stuff to be coming kind of throughout this week. Once I figure out how to get all of the pictures of your essays somewhere on Google Classroom for you to individually look at, you guys can expect to see those. So let me close out of some of my tabs here. All right. So the last thing that you had to do on Classroom was before this whole shelter in place started, we were working on the end of Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So there's one more assignment that you guys are going to have that deal with Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and that is going to be a timed write, which I think is pretty apt because of the new AP test format. So it's on here under the discussion boxes. So one thing that I would kind of recommend is over the next, couple of days, because the grading system for this now is a whole other bag of tricks that we have to get used to. But if you have not yet looked at, so like, for example, right here, I'm looking at Brooke. Brooke is in a group with Georgiadis and Danny. You guys should be looking at each other's discussion boxes for the parts that you do not have to focus in on. And this is because I want you to be familiar with the poem. So the last assignment that you guys are going to have to do for Rime of the Ancient Mariner, your timed write, is going to be a question. And I'm going to put a little Google form up to kind of see when you guys want to do this. But I feel like because it's a 45-minute time limit, I do not want to show you the prompt ahead of time, but I can tell you about it. So that you can kind of prepare notes and things. You're going to have your poem in front of you, hopefully, and I'm going to post it and leave it up for a 2-hour window. So in those 2 hours, that doesn't mean everyone has to log on at once and kind of work in a 45-minute time period. If I post it and it's going to be up on Thursday from 12 to 2, then you have to log on sometime Thursday 12 to 2, do your timed write, and then submit it on Google Classroom. So the Google form will have a couple of days for you guys to pick between and a couple different 2-hour time slots to see what works for everybody. And again, if there's a time that you can't do it because you have another commitment, just kind of let me know on the side in an email and we'll figure that out. So going back to Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the first thing that I would recommend is, because it's been a while, you guys should go back through parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 and kind of just get your head around what it was that we were reading. So remembering the fact that we were doing this frame story. So it's about this old man who stops this younger man as he's on his way into this wedding, and he's got this story that he has to tell. And for some reason, his skinny hand, his eyes, this wedding guest feels compelled to listen to him. So we've got this frame story because there's something happening, and then the old man wants to tell him about something that has already happened in the past. Because it is an epic poem, there's a lot going on here, but I said the things I wanted you guys to focus in on more than anything were the different references to religion and nature. And that's something that's going to have to do with your timed write. So if you haven't gone and kind of reviewed the different religious symbols and possibilities in the first couple parts, you're going to want to do that. So we learn in part 1 that the mariner was on this crew and they were going on this long trip. They passed the equator, and for some reason, they were thrown off track. and they were brought down, not necessarily just to the South Pole, but we also think about like what has this person and this crew done that brings them down in terms of not going up, ascending to heaven, but going down as far as possibly, doing something wrong. So there's a lot of imagery that deals with things that are directional, up, down. And the main conflict is established in part one, whereas they're stuck, their boat's in this ice while they wait for it to the ice to crack so that they can be free. There's this bird. The bird is going to be a huge symbol here. The bird is this albatross, and they praise it as a Christian thing, as if it had been a Christian soul. We healed it in God's name. So recognizing the fact that this bird is kind of a symbol of God. It's one of God's creations. You've heard the adage that we're all God's children. And for some mindless reason, once the ice starts to break up and the wind returns, the mariner shoots the bird. He kills the bird. So we have a couple of really important symbols already. The fact that the mariner keeps the wedding guest from going inside. He keeps him from the church. So there's maybe something to consider there. What could this wedding stand for? What could it be a symbol of? But also, we don't know at this point if the mariner is a good thing or a bad thing, because he's keeping this man from going within this church. We also have, again, the directions that could be religious symbols. And then finally, we've got sin, right? This kind of mindless sin that this old man commits because, for really no good reason, against this Christian soul. Part two, we kind of see the fickle nature of mankind, if you want to say that the crew that the mariner is with is representative of humanity, because at first they're angry with the mariner for doing this thing, for killing this bird, because it doesn't benefit them in any way. You shot the bird that made the breeze blow, but then as soon as things change and the wind does pick up, then their fickle nature changes them, and they're all of a sudden like, hey, good job, you killed this bird that brought the fog and mist, so good for you. So in that moment, they kind of align themselves, even though they didn't commit the sin. The fact that they watch it and allow it to happen, they're kind of these bystanders. It aligns them also with the same damnation that the mariner is going to have to go through. So as the boat is freed from the South Pole, it gets kind of back on track, and it starts to be stuck again somewhere we think near the equator, because there's water everywhere. These men can't drink anything. So this is the beginning of their punishment for the sin that they have committed. Everywhere things are rotten, and there's no water for them. And so the men, again, decide to blame the mariner. So again, their fickle nature. They hang the albatross around his neck as a cross, or instead of a cross. So here, nature is replacing religion as something, and it's almost kind of like a mockery, like this sin that you've decided to do instead of the cross implies the fact that maybe this man he's given up some type of his relationship or his alliance with God because of this sin, and so now he kind of has to like bear this burden of this giant bird around his neck. In part three, kind of going back through and summarizing, there's that everything is still. So there's not a lot of movement. We said this is the part where they feel like a painted ship upon a painted ocean. But they see this boat that's kind of bobbing and weaving in the water, nearing up with them. And as it gets closer, they realize this isn't a savior, which again, maybe there's some symbolism there. But instead, it's something that they think that they want to see, some kind of salvation. But it ends up being a skeleton ship that is pirated by two things, death and the woman who's representative of life and death. And we'll get kind of back to that. But the mariner gets into some kind of a game or a bet with her, and he loses. And so all of the men, their souls are taken away from them. So one of the things that sometimes people question here is, well, if he's the one that shot the bird, why is he the one that gets to live when all these men, their bodies drop down? And really the way to kind of talk about that is he has to be alone here. So for some reason, the sin that he's committed and the sin that he's kind of continued to be haunted by, that is kind of getting worse and worse, he has to be alone. So here he's feeling judgment now, not only for what he did, maybe on a religious sense, but he's also feeling judgment now from these 4 times 50 living men, these 200 men, because they're all, they drop down, their bodies are dropped down, but their eyes remain open, kind of cursing him and staring at him. And then at the end of the part, we are reminded again of his sins. That reminder, the end of part 2, they hung it around his neck. At the end of part 3, they remind him that the souls are whizzing by him just like the crossbow whizzed by before he killed the albatross. All right, so the last part we talked about before we kind of went on this little stay at home is we talked about part 4, which comes out of the frame story, and now it's back with the wedding guest who tells the ancient mariner, I fear thee, right? So if you're the only one that was still surviving from this, I fear you, I fear your skinny hand. In other words, like maybe you're a ghost, maybe you're a zombie, we don't really know. Notice how he assumes the worst, like you've got to be something bad, right? The mariner is, this otherworldly being. Remember, it begins with, it was an ancient mariner at the beginning of the poem. But the mariner reassures him and says, fear not. Remember, there's got to be a point here because this is a didactic narrative. So the mariner's trying to teach this kid something, and it's not just don't kill birds. So when we begin part 4, he talks about how he was alone. So that idea of him having to bear this burden alone. And then we've got his inability to look to heaven and to pray. So he realizes that there is this separation between himself and his religion, or from God. And, as he's going on, he starts to look at the moon and he starts to appreciate nature. So being alone, finally, without the distraction of the other men, without the distraction of humanity or mankind, he starts to appreciate little things or notice things like the moon in the sky, and the way that these weird water snakes are moving through the water. And these are creatures, just like the albatross, God-made creatures that usually people might be repulsed by or disgusted by. And when he acknowledges, after looking at them for a while, these are happy living things that no tongue their beauty might declare, a spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. So the fact that he is able to realign himself with God by kind of saying, I was able to acknowledge their beauty and their worthiness on this earth. Sure, my kind saint took pity on me and I blessed them unaware. And at that moment, the albatross falls off of his neck and into the sea. So it would seem that, okay, well, he's realized what he did. He's blessed these living things that before he overlooked. And so it's easy to say, yay, good for you. Now everything's going to get better. But out of the 7 parts, that's only the end of part 4. So even though he has here seemingly been forgiven for what he has done, that doesn't necessarily mean he's done paying the price for it, right? The acknowledgement of his sin is just one part of his journey as a Christian soul, to kind of getting back in the good standings of God, right? It's not just, oh, I did this thing, like we're all God's children, like, yes, I'm good now. But there's more to come. All right, so now beginning with the parts we didn't talk about together that you guys did in your discussion boxes. I'm going to try and load this up because this is my own little bit of part 5. Let's see what we got here. All right, so first we'll go through the poem here. All right, so the first thing we can notice that part 5 begins with this idea of sleep. Oh, sleep, it is a gentle thing, beloved from pole to pole. To Mary Queen, the praise be given. She sent the gentle sleep from heaven that slid into my soul. So another kind of indication that he's maybe been forgiven for his sin is he has peace, right? So the absence of sleep is the absence of peace of mind. So now he has finally been granted some peace of mind. We have a religious allusion here. He mentions Mary Queen. That would be like the Queen Mother. So as a Christian queen, or as the Queen Mother, whoever he's talking about here, he recognizes again and thanks God, or the Mother Mary, for allowing him this peace of mind. So literally what's happening here is he is able to sleep. As the part goes on, the silly buckets on the deck that had so long remained, I dreamt that they were filled with dew, and when I awoke it rained. Okay, so more religious symbolism here. He's just confessed his sin. He's granted peace of mind, and then when he wakes up, remember, we were in this hot climate. Now this rain is falling down on him. So the image of water splashing over the mariner as he was laying there, we've got maybe some kind of baptism. So whether it's rebirth or, becoming a child of God again, we've got this definite symbolism here of the baptism. My lips were wet, my throat was cold, my garments were all dank. Sure, I had drunken in my dreams, and still my body drank. So this water, this baptismal water, or whatever it's representative of, it's giving him restoration, right? It's starting to reinvigorate him. I moved and could not feel my limbs. I was so light almost. I thought that I had died in sleep and was a blessed ghost. So because these things feel so good, it's almost like it's relieving a lot of that earlier pressure that he had. And soon I heard a roaring wind. It did not come near, but with its sound it shook the sails that were so thin and sere. The upper air burst into life, and 100 fire flags sheen. To and fro they were hurried about, and to and fro and in and out the wan stars danced between. So these fire flags, these are again that reference to St. Elmo's fires. So just a lot of interesting imagery here of things that he would see on this boat. Fun fact here, because I know you guys like when I give you fun facts. Samuel Taylor Coleridge had actually never been on a boat before he wrote this poem. So I know we talked in the beginning about the influence maybe of extracurricular activities or some psychedelic drugs on his poem writing abilities. So this is something maybe it was all just part of his hallucination on opium, but he was also a smart man, so he could have looked things up. But yeah, he didn't go on a boat until actually after he wrote this poem. All right, moving on. And the coming wind did roar more loud, and the sails did laugh like sedge, and the rain poured down from one black cloud. The moon was at its edge. So more and more baptism, but kind of an interesting thing is, what is this one black cloud that is providing the rain? So almost a question of, is this a good restoration, or is it still, there's still some black cloud or damnation following him around, that he has to continue his penance for? The thick black cloud was cleft and still. The moon was at its side. Like water shot from some high crag, the lightning fell with never a jag, a river steep and wide. The loud wind never reached the ship, yet now the ship moved on. Beneath the lightning and the moon, the dead men gave a groan. So now we also wonder, are the dead men being replenished by all of the rain and things coming down on them? And again, if they're starting to groan, these men that are dead, well, we could look at that as they're coming back to life. And if they are, that's something that has some religious suggestion to it. Jesus is the one that can rise from the dead. So if these men are being brought back, this is maybe something that is it a good thing? Is Jesus or God allowing this to happen? Or is this kind of a sinister thing? They groaned and stirred. They all uprose directionally, coming up, so maybe a good thing. Nor spoke nor moved their eyes. It had been a strange, even in a dream, to see those dead men rise. The helmsman steered, the ship moved on, yet never a breeze up blew. The mariners all again worked the ropes where they were wont to do. They raised their limbs like lifeless tools. We were a ghastly crew. So kind of, again, maybe we could look at this as a new pattern emerging as this idea of duality. So there's these directions of these men are rising up. There's something that has to be, associated with God, but there's also this idea that they're ghastly crew. that they look sinister. So the two sides of man, or the dual nature of man, as being good but also evil, is something that we could say we're starting to see as another motif in this poem. The mariner, there are times when he does something bad, but then there's also times when he, shows that he's a kind of good guy. And so mankind in general has this duality, good and evil. The body of my brother's son stood by me knee to knee. The body I had pulled at one rope, but he said naught to me. So now we also get a sense that these aren't just nameless, identityless men, but family. So maybe that's put in there by Coleridge to show that, humans are connected. It's kind of your interpretation. I fear the ancient mariner, be calm, thou wedding guest. 'Twas not the souls that fled in pain, which to their corpses came again, but a troop of spirits blessed. So basically, when the old guy is like, hey, so these guys all rose from the dead, and then they started like helping me pull on ropes and things to get the boat ready. The wedding guest gets creeped out, like, whoa, this is unnatural. But essentially, here what the mariner is saying is, don't worry, their souls weren't coming back in them. It wasn't them actually coming back to life, but instead a group of spirits re-inhabited these bodies. So it wasn't them, but it was spirits. So now he's getting some kind of like divine intervention in his life. For when it dawned, they dropped their arms and clustered round the mast. Sweet sounds rode slowly through their mouths and from their bodies passed. Around flew each sweet sound, then darted to the sun. Slowly the sounds came back again, now mixed, now one by one. So we have some sound imagery here. Their mouths are opening and there's sweet sounds coming from it. So is it prayer? Is it hymns? We know that whatever these transformative sounds are, it's something with worship towards God. So again, this religious imagery. Sometimes a dropping from the sky, I heard a skylark sing. Sometimes all little birds that are, how they seem to fill the air with their sweet jargoning. So not only is it these spirits that are singing, but also the birds. So this mixture of nature and religion here is really important, because it's aligning nature as not something separate from religion, but appreciating nature is also being appreciative of God and religion. And now 'twas like all instruments, now like a lonely flute, and now it is an angel's song that makes the heavens be mute. It ceased, yet still the sails made on a pleasant noise till noon, a noise like that of hidden brook in the leafy month of June. To that the sleeping woods all night singeth a quiet tune. Till noon we quietly sailed on, and yet never a deep breeze did breathe. Slowly and smoothly went the ship, move onward from beneath. So now we've got more movement. This is kind of advancing with all of these sounds and singing. The boat continues to move on. So there's no breeze, but the singing and this intervention is allowing them to continue moving. But there is a little bit of sense of foreboding, because at the end of that 19th stanza in the section, it says, something is moving the ship from beneath. So again, directions beneath would not necessarily be a good thing. Under the keel 9 fathoms deep, from the land of mist and snow, the spirit slid, and it was he that made the ship to go. The sails at noon left off their tune, and the ship stood still also. So what is it that's moving them? Well, something that has haunted them or has been with them since the land of mist and snow, which is, of course, that's where he killed the albatross. So this thing that is still being carried, the albatross, might be gone, but there's still reminders of what it was that he did. The sun right up above the mast had fixed her to the ocean, but in a minute she gan to stir with a short uneasy motion, backwards and forwards half her length with short uneasy motion. So what's happening here? Well, essentially, there's kind of this imagery of the boat being pulled one way and the other, this kind of tug being pulled in two directions. So that could again allude to the idea that sometimes mankind is kind of caught between two things, right? Like doing this, doing that. What is it exactly? And then like a pawing horse let go, she made a sudden bound. So imagine that, like a horse that's like being held back by the reins, but is pawing at the ground to go. As soon as you let it go, it's going to lurch forward. So that's what's happening to this boat. It flung the blood into my head, and I fell down in a swound. So he faints. How long in that same fit I lay, I have not to declare, but ere my living life returned, I heard in my soul discern 2 voices in the air. Okay, so if it wasn't weird enough having these spirits come back into the bodies of these sailors and sing with the birds, Now he faints, and as he's kind of coming to, laying down on this deck, he hears two voices. All right, so there's some kind of conversation happening. And remember, Coleridge was the one that put in these little side notes. So in his side note here, he says, the polar spirits, fellow demons, the invisible inhabitants of the element, take part in his wrong. Two of them relate one to the other, that penance long and heavy for the ancient mariner hath been accorded to the polar spirit who returneth southward. So the polar spirit that had moved them, that had been with them this whole time, kind of haunting them, you could say, now goes back. But we hear these two voices discussing the ancient mariner, right? So we'll kind of read on from here. Is it he, quoth one, is this the man? By him who died on cross with his cruel bow, he laid full low the harmless albatross. Okay, so again, if we had any doubt of what this guy did, he killed this harmless bird. The spirit who bideth by himself in the land of mist and snow, he loved the bird that loved the man who shot him with his bow. So here, not just a reminder that you killed a harmless bird, but this bird loved you and you still did something. This bird was your mascot. It was around, it would try to help you, and you killed the thing that loved you, that wanted only good things for you. The other was a softer voice, as soft as honeydew. Quoth he, the man hath penance done, and penance more will do. So with this discussion, he hears, he's already paid kind of the price. His crew died. He's had no water to drink anything. He's stuck by himself. But there's more to come that he, unfortunately, will still have to pay for. All right. So before we go on to part 6, sorry, part 5 was really long. We did a summary. Symbol of rain. We have the black cloud juxtaposition, the two voice. Some of you put this in your response, which I really liked, so I added to my notes. But the two voices might be like, one thing is his conscience talking, saying like, we all know secretly when we do something wrong, our conscience is that moral code kind of. So it's his conscience kind of working itself out. We have the foreshadowing that his penance has all not been paid yet, and then 2 shows up again. So these two voices, just like the couple, death and the nightmare, life and death. So is this a bad omen? Because the last time we had these 2 things that were encountered with the mariner, it was bad. Cool. We went through a lot of this. Because I kind of told you in the first place that this was a connection to Frankenstein. This is an extra box. I didn't put this in for you guys, but some connections to Frankenstein already. If you know anything about Frankenstein, it's about this guy that makes this weird, grotesque monster out of found body parts. So in this part, we have the reanimation of dead men, which is kind of an allusion to Frankenstein here as well. So yeah, also the question of what it takes to gain forgiveness. All right, let's go to our last 2 parts. All right. Part 6. Sorry, I keep reading off my own copy and forgetting to bring it on. All right, so we've got the 2 voices that start here. First voice, but tell me, speak again, the softer response renewing. What makes the ship drive so fast? What is the ocean doing? The second voice, still as a slave before his lord, the ocean hath no blast. His great bright eye most silently up to the moon is cast. So basically, the mariner still fainted. His eye is cast up towards the moon, which could be a good thing. He's looking to heaven rather than being face down. And they're commenting just on the movement of the ship. If he may know which way to go, for she guides him smooth or grim. See, brother, see how graciously she looketh down on him. So the moon here being personified as this feminine thing, guiding this man, she's looking down on him. Good thing or a bad thing. The first voice, but why drives on that ship so fast without a wave or wind? The second voice, the air is cut away before and closes from behind. Fly, brother, fly, more high, or we shall be belated. So keep going. We have to go fast. This boat is moving quickly. And it says if we don't, we're going to be late. Late for what? For slow and slow that ship will go when the mariner's trance is abated. So as soon as he wakes up, the ship is going to slow down. So we have to go as far as we can right now. I woke, and we were sailing on as in a gentle weather. 'Twas night, calm night, the moon was high, the dead men stood together. So the moon is now high. The boat has slowed down, obviously, because he can stand up. And now the dead men, who before were being inhabited by these spirits, they're all standing there, just kind of probably like looking pretty creepy, lurking. All stood together on the deck from the charnel dungeon fitter. So they're not looking so great. It's been hot. Their bodies are rotting. And all fixed on me their stony eyes that in the moon did glitter. So again, this repetition of their eyes. The eyes are still staring at him, judging him. The pang, the curse with which they died had never passed away. I could not draw my eyes from there, not turn them up to pray. So it's still haunting him what he did, not just killing the albatross, but being responsible for the death of these men, right? And now the spell was snapped once more. I viewed the ocean green and looked far forth, little saw of what else had been seen. Like one that on a lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. This is always one of my favorite parts to actually like try and explain. And I don't know why, but it's like if we were in class, I would do this totally, like show you guys what I mean, and you would totally get it. But essentially, with the judgment of these men, he's describing it's like walking alone at night on a road and kind of fearing, okay, I think there might be someone following behind me, but if I turn around and I walk on and I don't see anybody there, I'm gonna feel better. But if I turn around and happen to see somebody, it's just gonna increase my fear. So I always talk about, like, when I lived in the city, there's this whole weird thing where there's like this social conduct that you don't let people just kind of like creepy walk behind you. Like if you're walking down the sidewalk, especially being like a woman, and if somebody, gets off a bus and is walking behind you, you either pass the person or you leave enough space so that they don't feel like there's someone right behind them. So I would always do this crazy stuff when I lived in the city, where if someone was creep walking behind me, I would like stop and tie my shoe, because I hated this feeling, right? That of feeling like there was someone following behind me. So it's almost like, what's worse here? Not knowing you're being followed, or knowing and acknowledging the fact that there's someone following you. So that's how this guy feels, this mariner, with always kind of waiting for the uncertainty of what is to come. But soon there breathed a wind on me, nor sound nor motion made. Its path was not upon the sea, in ripple or in shade. It raised my hair, it fanned my cheek like a meadow gale of spring. It mingled strangely with my fears, yet felt a welcoming. Gotcha. Swiftly, swiftly flew the ship, yet she sailed softly too. Sweetly, sleepily blew the breeze, on me alone it blew. Oh, dream of joy, is this indeed the lighthouse top I see? Is this the hill? Is this the kirk? Is this mine own country? So, as he's sailing, he realizes he's coming back to his home. Oh, dream of joy. So, a couple other things here. All right, symbols of the things he sees. He notices a trinity when he comes back, the lighthouse, which usually lighthouses are a source of helping boats that have lost their way or keeping boats from danger. So he sees this light. That's the first thing. He sees the hill, representative of nature, and he sees the kirk, which is the church. So the things that he notices as soon as he gets home. First, this trinity. We drifted o'er the harbor bar, and with sobs did pray, oh, let me be awake, my God. Oh, let me sleep always. So if this is real life, please let me be not dreaming this. Otherwise, if I'm dead and dreaming coming home, let me be dead. The harbor bay was clear as glass, so smoothly it was strewn, and on the bay the moonlight lay, and the shadow of the moon. The rock shone bright, the kirk no less, that stands above the rock. So the church is above the rock, right? Religion above nature. The moonlight steeped in silentness, the steady weathercock. And the bay was white with silent light, till rising from the same, full many shapes and shadows were, and crimson colors came. A little distance from the prow, those crimson shadows were. I turned my eyes upon the deck. Oh, Christ, what I saw there. So all of the people, the spirits that were standing in those dead bodies here, right? They leave. And we know this through this random imagery, because thankfully Samuel Taylor Coleridge put the little notation there for us. Each corse lay flat, lifeless and flat, so corse being corpse. And by the holy rood, a man all light, a seraph man, on every corse there stood. So where these bodies were just kind of creepily looking at him, now the bodies have dropped down, but the spirits that were inhabiting them, the seraphs, which is an angel, is standing over them. So they all have this angel over them. So what has been helping him this whole time? Well, it's been religion. It's been God, even though he kind of sinned against God. The seraph band each waved his hand. It was a heavenly sight. They stood as signals to the land, each one a lovely light. The seraph band each waved his hand, nor voice did they impart, no voice, but oh, the silence sank like music on my heart. So the angels leading him back towards the light, towards his home. But soon I heard the dash of oars. I heard the pilots cheer. My head was turned perforce away, and I saw a boat appear. Okay. So usually what would happen is when these big boats would go out on this long voyage, whoever was the harbor master or the one that was in charge of the wharf, they would, when they saw a big boat coming in, because it's not like nowadays where you have a boat and you can steer it with your motor into your little dock, they would have a smaller boat kind of come out and lead them into where they needed them to go. So in this little boat, there is a pilot, the pilot's boy, a father, and a son. I heard them coming fast. Dear Lord in heaven, it was a joy the dead men could not blast. I saw a third. So now 3 men coming out to see him, a trinity, and heard his voice. It was the hermit good. He singeth loud his godly hymns that he makes in the wood. He'll shrieve my soul. He'll wash away the albatross's blood. So the 3 that he see coming out to him, a father, a son, and then the hermit here would be the Holy Spirit. Now, hermits back in Coleridge's time were these religious figures that lived apart from mankind, off in nature, off in the woods, and you could hear them, singing hymns or praying, but they were these men of God. So we've got a Father, a Son, and a Holy Spirit, right? Someone who's not amongst the living and them, but has come out with him this time. All right, so before we get to our last part, which is where we find out finally what the heck we're supposed to learn here, coming here, we've got our summary. All right, the eyes are back, the green ocean. So I don't know if we've talked about it yet, so don't worry about that. Okay, in this section, and this is something that you will not think of for a long time, if ever, but there are parts of this stanza of the poem that are alluded to or included in Frankenstein. That has to do with the nature of fear. Oh, so that part I was talking to you guys about not knowing, like, is it better to know something's behind you, following you, or and to confirm it, or to kind of just go on not acknowledging it and kind of feeling like it's always there. Kind of reminds me of that preview that's always on right now for that movie, The Invisible Man. All right, last part. Let's go through this. Oh man, and I'm way behind on here. Sorry, y'all. All right, part 7. This hermit good lives in that wood which slopes down to the sea. How loudly his sweet voice he rears, that he loves to talk with mariners that come from far country. He kneels at morn and noon and eve. He hath a cushion plump. It is the moss that wholly hides the rotted old oak stump. The skiff boat neared, I heard them talk. Why, this is strange, I trow. Where are those lights so many and fair? The signal made but now. So what caused these men, this trinity, to come out to him is they saw all of the angel spirits come out of these men and their bodies, and that's what brought them out. Now, it should be noted that at the end of part 6, the person that is especially exciting the mariner is this hermit, because out in the woods, it says, he'll shrieve my soul, he'll wash away the albatross's blood. He's looking to this hermit to kind of finish his absolution and his penance and forgive him ultimately for his sin. So, as they come out, strange by my faith, the hermit said, and they answered not our cheer. The planks looked warped, and see those sails, how thin they are and sere. I never saw aught like to them, unless perchance it were brown skeletons of leaves that lag my forest brook along, and the ivy tod is heavy with snow, and the owlet whoops in the wolf below, and eats the she-wolf's young. Dear Lord, it hath a fiendish look, the pirate made reply. I am afeard. Push on, said the hermit cheerily. So these people coming out to them, they've never seen anything like this boat, so it's in pretty bad shape as far as, like, the sails are thin, the boards are all warped, like it looks like it's been to hell and back, essentially. And the pilot is fearful, but the hermit urges them to push on, right? He says, I've seen things like that look really bad. The owlet whoops the wolf that eats the she-wolf's young. So I've seen stuff like this before, and the hermit is unafraid. The boat came closer to the ship, but I nor spake nor stirred. The boat came close beneath the ship, so the boat's coming beneath them. And straight a sound was heard. Under the water it rumbled on, still louder and more dread. It reached the ship, it split the bay, the ship went down like lead. So the arrival of this causes the ship to sink. Stunned by that loud and dreadful sound, which sky and ocean smote, like the one that hath been 7 days drowned, my body lay afloat. So again, he is the one spared. The bodies and the ship crash down into the ocean, but he remains. But swift as dreams, myself I found within the pilot's boat. Upon the whirl where the ship sank, the boat spun round and round, and all was still, save that the hill was telling of the sound. I moved my lips, the pilot shrieked, and fell down in a fit. So somebody else faints. The holy hermit raised his eyes and prayed where he did sit. So as soon as this guy starts talking, the hermit prays. I took the oars, the pilot's boy, who now doth crazy go, he's also having like a seizure or fainting, laughed loud and long, and all the while his eyes went to and fro. Ha ha, quothly he, full plain I see, the devil knows how to row. So they don't think he's a good guy. The hermit, is excited to get to him because maybe he thinks that there's some way he could save him. But to everybody else, he looks like a devil. He looks like a fiend. And now all in my own country I stood on the firm land. The hermit stepped forth from the boat, and scarcely could he stand. Oh, shrieve me, holy man. The hermit crossed his brow. Say quick, quoth he, I bid thee say, what manner of man art thou? So he wants to be forgiven, right? He wants that from the hermit, but the hermit demands that he kind of tells him what kind of guy he is. Forthwith this frame of mine was wrenched with a woeful agony, which woeful me to begin my tale, and then it left me free. Since then at an uncertain hour that agony returns, and till my ghastly tale is told, my heart within me burns. Okay, so kind of a jump. So the last thing we see in the mariner's tale is he basically urges this hermit, forgive me. But it says once he was relieved of his agony, by telling his tale, when the hermit says, what kind of guy are you? And he tells him what has happened to him, the agony is released. So he feels better. So in other words, telling others of his sin so that they can learn from it is what makes him feel better. So since then, ever since I came back, when that agony returns, I have to find someone to tell my story to. So now we're going to link back up with this frame story. I pass like night from land to land. I have strange power of speech. That moment that I see his face, I know the man that must hear me. So he looks for people that are in need of learning this lesson that he has seemingly learned. To him my tale I teach. What loud uproars burst from that door, the wedding guests are there, but in the garden bower the bride and bridesmaids singing are, and hark the little vesper bell which biddeth me to prayer. O wedding guest, this soul hath been alone on a wide, wide sea, so lonely 'twas that God himself scarce seemed there to be. O sweeter than the marriage feast, 'tis sweeter far to me, to walk together to the kirk with goodly company. To walk together to the kirk, and all together pray, while each to his great Father bends, old men and babes and loving friends, and youths and maidens gay. Farewell, farewell, but this I tell to thee, thou wedding guest, he prayeth well who loveth well, both man and bird and beast. So, as the wedding guest is being kept from going into this wedding, this celebration that has kind of been trying to draw him in this whole time. There's sounds of people laughing, and there's music, people dancing, there's food, there's drink. And the wedding guest has been here, kept back by this man to hear this tale. And he was picked out by the mariner because the mariner knows when it's the person that needs to hear him. So the lesson that he has to teach him is simply this. He prayeth well who loveth well, both man and bird and beast. So the people that realize we're all God's children and we have respect for everything that God has created, right? We can respect the boundaries of what God has done. We'll pray the best, we'll love the best, we'll have the best relationship with God. So learn from my mistakes, in other words, right? That's what he's telling the wedding guest. He prayeth best who loveth best all things, both great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made them and loveth all. So you could really take this so far out, right? The people you like to make fun of or bully, don't do that. We're all God's children. Those spiders you like to kill when they're walking around your house, which I do, don't kill them. We're all God's children. So this is the lesson that the mariner basically wants him to learn, is respect for other creatures, respect for the earth, for life. And then we get the end here. The mariner whose eye is bright, whose beard with age is hoar, is gone. And now the wedding guest turned from the bridegroom's door. So when the mariner leaves with his glittering eye, the wedding guest, rather than going in and joining the rest of the party, he turns away from this party. He went like one that had been stunned and is of sense forlorn, a sadder and a wiser man. He rose the morrow morn. So again, that final image of lifting up and rising. So what does this all mean? Well, it's a sad day when you realize kind of the severity of the effects of your actions. But knowing that, the wedding guest is able to maybe turn away from something that wouldn't allow him to have respect for God and for the ways of all these people. So let's talk about some themes and important symbols before we wrap this up. Again, you're free to go look at all this stuff online if you need to, find some criticism. I have a little article that I'm going to post. It's called Romanticism and Christianity in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And maybe you choose to look through this. Maybe you choose not to. But if you do, it would not hurt. I'm going to post this on Classroom. So, basically, the theme here is that man is sinful. We talked about the dual nature of mankind, good and evil. Because of original sin, man is evil. And the lesson of this poem, though, is that doesn't mean we're damned. We can repent and perform penance, and our souls will be forgiven. We can have redemption. The other theme or lesson here is that humans should respect all of God's creatures. We talked about this. Like nature, we're all made by the same God, and we're all deserving of his faith and love. Now, you can probably look into a lot more of these symbols, but one of the most important ones is the Ancient Mariner. So some people view him as the embodiment of Adam. So from Adam and Eve, the one that created original sin, that committed original sin, shooting the albatross, like eating from the tree of knowledge. So Adam is paying for this, trying to bring his lesson on to the rest of humanity. We could also just look at the mariner as a sinner in Christianity's eyes. The wedding is actually something that a lot of people don't think about, but what he's keeping the wedding guest from is, and the wedding guest being young, is, the innocent person that still hasn't had a chance to commit these sins. So he's trying to save these people that are still pure. The wedding guest is kept from going into the wedding, where we talked about the bride was in red, and the weddings themselves, these parties where you forget what the outside world when you're kind of wrapped up in your own stuff. If you remember back to sophomore year, the Mask of the Red Death, the revelers and their party. So the wedding is kind of this everyday life, the fun, the chaos of it, where we don't think about the consequences of our actions, and we don't think about God and religion. So he's keeping him from this life where he would essentially not be aware of the effects of his actions. The hermit is a symbol of redemption, maybe even a merciful God rather than a wrathful God. If you remember American literature, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, this is a merciful God that's being portrayed here. And then we've got a lot of different symbols for the sin that he committed. The albatross, the spirit from the polar region that follows them, the ghost ship that comes, you could say that's a symbol of the sin too. So all of these things are used to create this didactic story to basically tell us to appreciate God's creatures and consider the consequences of our actions. So, like I said, I'm going to have a Google form where you can put together your thoughts on what day and time block you'd like to do your timed right. But your timed right will be about the religious symbolism in this poem and how that contributes to the meaning of the work as a whole. So kind of prepare yourself for that. Make sure you have some examples ready, because you are expected to have examples and some direct quotations. You do not have to do line numbers. You can just refer to like in part 7 or in part 1. Bonus if you give me like the 17th stanza, whatever. So that's what we've got going on. All right. Last but not least, this poem is actually just an introduction to Frankenstein, which is the book you guys should take it home. The thing I'm going to post right now, and you do not have to do it yet, but if you want to get started on it, is some essential background with Frankenstein. So this essential background is something that I would like you to have some notes on. So if you want to do this electronically, have electronic notes, that's great. If you would rather do some notes that are by hand. But essentially, if you kind of look at my screen, in order to begin reading our novel with the best possible scaffolding of knowledge, there are some things you need to be familiar with. So my recommendation for how you should take notes is obviously right here. If you want to do it on the computer, it's probably easier. You can just copy and paste little snippets of things. So these essential questions, obviously super important. These are things that we'll talk about, big picture stuff that might turn into an eventual timed write. But if you look at the questions, I think what's interesting is you'll see that a lot of them also can be applicable to the poem we just read. What's the nature of humanity? Well, mankind has a dual nature, good and evil. What responsibility do people have to others? What consequences do we face when we don't take responsibility for our actions? Well, it's like the ancient mariner. What happened to him when he refused to see that he did something bad at first? So what you can do if you kind of look through this, you need to have the definition of each of these words: frame, story, illusion, doppelganger, epistolary, and archetype. And I want you to also have the function